This happened when I was around 10 years old. Childhood memories are often hazy, but this event is etched clearly for reasons you'll soon understand. It was a school day, and heavy rain had been pouring down relentlessly since morning. After picking me up, Mom and Dad had to leave again immediately. My aunt, who lived in the neighboring town, had a minor accident, and they needed to help her since she lived alone. They planned to come home that night, but the storm grew increasingly violent, making road travel too dangerous. Eventually, they decided to stay overnight at a friend of Auntie's house, which was closer to the hospital. I remember them calling me on the landline, their voices full of regret for leaving me alone. I insisted I was fine and not hungry. Mom gave me a list of instructions. Lock all the doors and windows, make sure all the curtains are tightly closed, turn on the front porch light, and the hallway light inside. Basic stuff. Back then, I didn't understand why they were so worried. In fact, I was happy to have the house to myself freely. It meant I could eat cake to my heart's content and sleep whenever I wanted. Since there was no TV in my room, I decided to lounge in the living room watching a movie. I intended to do all of Mom's tasks right before bed, as I planned to stay up late. However, sometime in the middle of the night, drowsiness hit, and I fell asleep on the sofa. I don't remember what time I woke up. The TV had turned itself off automatically, meaning at least 2 hours had passed. The first thing I felt was a bone-chilling cold. True, the night was getting later, but the cold was unnatural, drastically different from when I fell asleep. I wanted to go back to sleep, but then I remembered Mom's list. I knew she'd know if I didn't do it, and I didn't want to let her down, so I forced myself up and started checking. I went around, locking the thick wooden front and back doors, tightly closing all the heavy fabric curtains, checking the locks on the stained glass windows, and making sure the porch and hallway lights were on. Everything was tightly secured. This only confused me more because the piercing cold still lingered. I stretched my hand towards some windows. No draft was coming in, no cracks. Maybe the storm damaged our small generator? My mind tried to find a logical reason. I was too tired to think about it further. Finally, I decided to go up to my bedroom on the upper floor. My bedroom was on the side of the house facing the small forest behind our place on Kampong Hujan Street. From here, the ferocity of the storm felt real. Rain seemed to be bombing the window glass. Lightning flashed continuously, followed by thunderclaps that shook the walls. I wasn't afraid of lightning, but I worried the old teak tree in the back forest might fall on the house. Maybe that's why, despite being exhausted, I couldn't sleep. As I lay there trying to close my eyes, my ears started picking up a strange sound. Every now and then, there was a creak, like old wood groaning. Strangely, the entire upper floor was covered in thick carpet. The sound didn't match the wind-shifting branches or the rain. It was different, more close. The sound started to bother me. It wasn't the storm keeping me awake. It was that stupid noise. I couldn't stand it anymore. I sat up and stared around the dark room when the next bolt of lightning struck. Illuminating the room for an instant, my eyes fixed on the only large wooden object in the room. Grandfather's tall, dark antique wardrobe. The room went dark again. I sat quietly. About a minute later, lightning flashed again, and in that split second of white light, my heart seemed to stop. The wardrobe door was now slightly open. I was absolutely certain it had been tightly shut before. Something, or someone, had opened it. There was something in my room. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I barely breathed. With slow, careful movements, I slid down from the bed and crawled towards the bedroom door. The distance from the bed to the door felt like traversing a jungle wilderness. Once in the hallway, I immediately ran lightly down the creaking wooden stairs and hid under the large dining table in the dining room. Only then did my tears start flowing freely. There was a stranger in my house in my wardrobe. My parents were too far away. I didn't know what to do. I don't know how long I hid, but suddenly I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Not normal footsteps. They sounded heavy, staggering, and like something was being dragged. The steps came closer, as if they knew exactly where I was hiding. Terror gripped me. I was sure my end was near. From the gap under the table, I saw them appear. I couldn't see the upper body, only 2 bare feet entering my view. The feet were covered in wet earth and dried mud, not yellow, but coated in dark grime up to the calves. The skin was covered in scratches and crusted wounds, as if they had crawled through underbrush or barbed wire. The feet looked swollen and deformed, walking with a limp and unstable, seeming to be in pain or extremely exhausted. They staggered right in front of my table. Then suddenly something fell from the person's hand, or perhaps grasp. Not a wrench, but a faegpyeon small hatchet, like a woodcutter's axe, that clattered loudly on the tiled floor. Every fiber of my being strained to hold back a scream. If the person bent down to pick it up, they would surely see me. With wide eyes, I watched the feet just standing there right in front of the fallen hatchet, not picking it up, not leaving either. Time seemed to freeze. Every second felt like torture. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the feet started moving again, staggering away from the table and disappeared from my view. I heard the heavy, dragging footsteps moving towards the front door. Then the sound of the large wooden door opening and slamming shut again. They were gone. I stayed hidden under that table for a very long time, half because I feared they were still there, half because my body was trembling violently from the trauma. At my age then, I was mature enough to understand how terrifying the danger I had just experienced was, but not old enough to know how to handle it. The rest of the night felt like a blurry nightmare. I remember taking that small hatchet from the floor and hiding it behind the living room cabinet. I didn't want my parents to find it and ask questions. The next morning, after ensuring the door was locked, I sneaked back to my room, got into bed, and finally fell into a deep sleep from exhaustion. Everything seemed normal afterwards. For some reason, I was afraid to tell Mom and Dad. I feared they'd be angry because I had let a stranger in, even though I was sure I'd locked everything, or that they'd feel guilty. I kept this secret for years. It was much later that I finally told them, and it took time for them to fully believe me. Looking back, not telling them at the time was a bad decision. Honestly, that experience left a deep mark. Ever since that night, I always slept with a small light on, and my fear of the dark lasted a very long time. Even now, I'm still confused about what exactly happened that night. One thing is certain. Lock your doors at night, especially when a storm rages by the forest's edge. I am an only child, living with my mother and father in a fairly large house. Though the house is a bit too big for just the three of us, my parents often joke that they never intended to have only one child. They just never got around to having more. When this incident happened, I was 20 years old. It was a rainy Saturday night in May. I don't remember the exact date, but it was one of the last weekends before summer began. Before I go on, there's one thing I should mention about myself. I have a few strange medical conditions that make my life difficult. I frequently suffer from panic attacks, faint easily, and sometimes struggle to breathe. On top of that, I'm one of those people who needs absolute silence to fall asleep. Even the hum of a small fan can keep me awake. Though I've mostly learned to cope, sleepovers and vacations are still unbearable. Many people say they love the sound of rain and that it helps them sleep, but for me, it's the opposite. Heavy rain is rare where I live, but when it does pour, the relentless pitter-patter on the roof keeps me up all night. That night, the rain was steady, not a full-blown thunderstorm, but heavy enough to keep me awake. It was well past midnight when I finally accepted that sleep wasn't coming anytime soon. So I got out of bed and tried to think of ways to burn off my restless energy. In the end, I decided to take a short walk in the rain. This wasn't the first time I'd done this. In fact, my parents had encouraged me to walk in the rain whenever I couldn't sleep. We lived in a very safe neighborhood, and there was a large public park right next to our house, so going out late at night wasn't dangerous at all. Plus, the park was well lit, which made me feel even more comfortable walking there alone in the dark. I threw on a raincoat, slipped out quietly without bothering with an umbrella, and deliberately left my phone behind. I knew well enough that staring at a screen would only keep me awake longer. Surprisingly, it was peaceful outside. I've always loved nature, and watching the trees sway gently in the wind, their branches glistening with raindrops, was exactly what I needed. After about 15 minutes, I started feeling tired, a good sign that I might actually sleep when I got back. As I turned to head home, something strange caught my eye. A long, dark shape lay flat in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a misshapen trash bag or something similar. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a person lying face down on the asphalt. A wave of nausea hit me. The only logical explanation was that they'd been hit by a car and were either hurt or worse. There was no other reason someone would lie motionless in the middle of the road, especially in the rain. As much as my instincts screamed at me to keep my head down and walk away, I felt like I had to do something. My parents had raised me a certain way. If I saw someone in need, I had to help. So against every fiber of my being, I started walking toward the figure. As I got closer, I could make out what they were wearing: black pants and a dark checkered shirt. Not exactly rain-appropriate attire. From the clothing, it looked like a man, though I'd already guessed that. I'm not sure if it was the weight of the situation or something else. But as I stepped onto the road, I suddenly realized how cold I was. It was as if the rain had gone from lukewarm to ice cold in an instant. Then, a scream shattered the silence. It sounded like a howl, but distorted, like an animal in pain. That's the only way I can describe it. My head snapped toward the sound, adrenaline flooding my veins. A quick scan of the tree line revealed nothing. The noise had to have come from deeper in the park, meaning there was no immediate danger. Still, the sheer strangeness of it all made my heart pound. I'd never heard anything like it before, and the lack of an explanation only fed my growing fear. But that fear was about to get 1,000 times worse, because when I turned back to the road, the man was no longer lying down. He was sitting bolt upright, staring straight at me. At that moment, everything seemed to fade, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. The only thing keeping me from fainting right then was the muffled sound of 1,000 raindrops hitting the ground around me. Before I could react, the man stood up and started running toward me, with a terrifying grin on his face, and worse, he was holding what looked like a kitchen knife. It was then that I truly understood what it meant to fear for my life. I snapped out of my daze and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. The wet grass made it impossible to sprint at full speed, but at least my pursuer had the same disadvantage. Instead of heading home, I dashed into the trees, hoping to lose him in the park. I didn't look back, not even once. I just ran like my life depended on it. And given how deranged that man had looked, I was pretty sure it did. I made it to the densest part of the park and hid behind a tree, gasping for air. There was no sign of him, at least none that I could see. The only thought in my mind was how I'd get home safely. Too scared to move, I stayed there waiting. I must have waited at least 20 minutes before finally creeping out from behind the tree. I took a long detour home, circling through the back of the park and approaching my house from a different block. No one followed me. When I finally made it inside, I collapsed onto my bed, soaked and thoroughly traumatized. I never got any answers about what happened that night. The howl was the most confusing part. I couldn't believe it was connected to the man who'd attacked me, but the timing was too coincidental. My best guess is that the man heard the scream too, looked up, saw me, and then did whatever he did for whatever reason. As for his motive, I have no idea. There are crazy people out there. Maybe he was on drugs or something. I know it's not a satisfying explanation, but I can't think of a better one. I still live in the same house today, and even though years have passed, it's hard not to think about that night every time it rains. I am 30 years old, and one of the few things that truly helps me clear my head is camping. Not the kind of camping at campgrounds or national parks where there are other people. I'm talking about camping in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in Northern California and have spent most of my adult life learning to find those remote pockets where you can still feel like you're the only person left on Earth. This story happened a few months ago. I had just broken up with my ex, and let's just say I was in a bad way. I desperately needed to be alone. So one day, I just packed up my truck and left. I didn't have any particular plan. I just gathered some supplies and decided to head back to a quiet riverside spot I'd found previously. It wasn't an official campsite or anything, just a little bend in the river you could reach if you followed a barely there dirt road past a lot of nothing. However, as I turned onto the dirt road leading to the river, my stomach dropped a little. There were already 2 trucks parked near the road's head, a gray one and a white one. I couldn't see anyone around, but knowing there were other people out there slightly ruined the vibe for me. I hadn't driven this far into the middle of nowhere to interact with people. I sat there for a moment, considering whether I should just turn around and find somewhere else. But I told myself that it was a big stretch of river, and the truck owners were likely camping far enough away that I wouldn't see them. I hiked about 15 minutes downstream and saw 2 men fishing ahead. They looked like the type you'd expect to see fishing. Thick beards, a little overweight, heavy boots, but they seemed more focused on something else. As I got closer, one of them quickly covered something with his jacket and gave me a half-awkward smile. As I passed, he called out, saying something about them just shooting tin targets and not meaning to scare me. I just nodded politely and kept walking without saying anything. As I continued walking, I couldn't help but replay the man's comment in my head. It wasn't what he said that bothered me. It was the rushed, awkward way it came out, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. I got that uneasy feeling you get when something just doesn't fit, but I pushed it down. People out there aren't exactly known for their social skills. It's not like it's uncommon for country folk to be a little gruff when talking to strangers. I told myself to let it go and focus on finding a good spot to set up camp. I found a spot a little further around the bend where the trees were thicker and the road was out of sight. It wasn't perfect, but it was hidden enough that I felt like I had my own space. I set up camp, pulled out a book, and tried to settle in. It started to drizzle not long after, so I put on my rain jacket and continued, letting the sound of the river and the soft drizzle drown everything else out. Then, I walked down to the rocks by the river to do some contemplating. That's when I saw someone across the water. It was one of the men from earlier, the one who had called out to me, only this time, he was alone. He saw me and waved. I hesitated, then waved back, thinking it was better to be friendly. He shouted, asking my name. For some reason, I shouted back my real name, Anisha, without really thinking about it. He stood there for a moment after I answered, then pulled something out of his jacket. At first I thought it was a phone, but then I realized it looked more like a disposable camera. Before I could even process it, he raised it and took a photo of me from across the river. And then, without a word, he just turned and started walking back towards the riverbank as if nothing had happened. I got goosebumps. The strange speech patterns and mannerisms were one thing, but taking my photo was the next level of weird. I went back to my campsite and just decided I would stay there for the rest of the night. After the sun went down, I crawled into my tent and tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop. I kept replaying that exchange in my head, dissecting every word, every misstep, every little thing. I don't know how long I lay there like that, just listening to the river and the light patter of rain on the tent. At some point, though, I started to hear something else. A faint, irregular sound, like someone stepping carefully on wet ground. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the rain or some animal, but the longer I listened, the clearer it sounded. Footsteps circling the campsite. The moment I made that connection, my stomach dropped to the floor. I didn't even need to wonder who it was. I wasn't stupid. I never went into the woods alone without protection, and this was no exception. Without hesitation, I grabbed my pistol from where I kept it near my sleeping bag. Then, I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the rain. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I needed to stay calm. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it across the trees. And there he stood, the creepy guy from earlier, a few yards away, half hidden behind a tree. He wasn't smiling or growling. He just had a blank expression on his face as if he wasn't fully aware. The scariest part wasn't his demeanor, but the fact that he held a small axe in his left hand. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. All I could think about was how far I was from anyone, how no one would hear me scream if it came down to it. Somehow, I managed to raise my pistol and point it at him. I forced my voice to stay calm, though every part of me was screaming. As firmly as I could, I said, "Leave now, or I'll kill you." His expression didn't change at all, as if my words meant nothing to him. After a few seconds of silence, he mumbled something about his friend Ivan having prevented him from coming to find me and that he had to take care of Ivan. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I fired a round straight into the trees above his head. He stumbled back a bit, clearly not expecting me to do that. I pointed the pistol at him again, a little more confident now. I told him it was his last chance and to drop the axe. He did, and a huge wave of relief washed over me. But I wasn't out of danger yet. I told him to take off his shoes so he'd have a harder time following me, and then made sure he didn't have any other weapons on him. Once I was sure he was unarmed, I told him to go to my tent and get my supplies. I watched him like a hawk as he fumbled with my things, forcing him to throw everything out so I could see it. I packed my essential items as quickly as possible, never letting him out of my sight. I slipped the axe into my backpack and made sure I wasn't forgetting anything. I had to leave the tent, but that was a small price to pay to stay alive. I then grabbed his shoes and threw them as far as I could into the darkness and told him to walk in the opposite direction. I kept shining my light on him the entire time, and as soon as he was far enough out of sight, I turned and started hiking back towards the river as fast as I could. That was the scariest part of the whole encounter, stumbling through the pitch-black woods in the rain with a potential killer behind me. I wasn't sure if he was following me, but I didn't care. I just kept moving, trying to use my flashlight as little as possible. The 2 pickup trucks were still in the parking lot when I finally got to my car. However, I didn't stop. I threw everything in and drove out of there. When I got back cell signal, I called the police and reported the entire incident, describing my location as best as I could. Several months have passed since then, and I'm not sure if anything came of it, but I haven't tried to find out. What still scares me the most about the whole thing are the comments he made about his friend Ivan, whom he quoted as taking care of. I really don't want to think about what that could mean, but there are just so many explanations. I'm glad I was armed. I could have lost my life that night if I hadn't been.